I want to welcome everyone today to Gardening in the Mountains. This is our program on fantastic ferns. My name is John Bowen. I'm a Buncombe County Extension Master Gardener volunteer, and I'm going to be your host today. We are really happy to have with us Britt Averine. She's the owner of Willow Creek Nursery, a wholesale nursery just north of Weaverville, North Carolina. Britt's been involved with horticulture and landscape design for 30 years or more. She started working in a retail nursery years ago, doing all that hard work that nursery work involves. And she's learned more about plants and gardening as she's gone along. And she's realized eventually that it was time to move into her own landscape design and installation business. She's been doing that for quite a while. She says she used to drive to her jobs in the landscape business in her Volkswagen Rabbit convertible with all her tools and her wheelbarrows sticking up out of the top. Unfortunately, we don't have any photos of that to show you today. In any event, Britt has seen all sides of growing and gardening and working in gardens. And over the years, she's developed a fascination with ferns. She's learned how to use them in landscapes and some of the things that work and don't work to grow ferns successfully. Now she's growing hundreds of them every year in her Willow Creek nursery. She's going to share some of that hard-earned knowledge with us today. I want you to know that much of today's presentation was pre-recorded up at Britt's nursery, but she's here with us now in real time, and she will be answering your questions throughout the presentation. So let's get started learning about ferns. We're back here in the woods with Britt Averine. She's going to tell us a little bit about specific ferns before we start talking about ferns in general. So Britt, take it away. Tell us how ferns are different than angiosperms, the plants we're used to.
Ferns are very different because they have fronds, unlike leaves, and they get fiddleheads in the spring, and they don't flower like other plants. You can just use them for their beautiful foliage, like this autumn fern right here. You can use around a tree like this, almost like a shrub, which is unusual for a perennial to be able to grow under roots like that. This is a really old Dawn redwood right here that typically you wouldn't be able to plant anything around. These stay evergreen all year. Beautiful autumn fern, which is actually a cousin to our native wood fern. And it's one of my favorite ferns. That's what this one is right here in this pot. So it started out this small. I probably planted maybe only 15 or 20 right here, and you can see what it did in 5 or 6 years. They were planted under this giant Dawn redwood, Metasequoia glyptosteroboides, if anyone wants to know. It's one of my favorite Latin tree names. It really does work as a shrub because it stays evergreen all year. And mid to late March, it gets kind of brown and falls down, but then the fronds just come right up through it in the spring. I don't do anything to this. It's just pretty much self-sufficient. So dry shade, they can actually take maybe 5 hours of sun even. It's a very diverse fern. It can take sun or shade, dry shade.
Does it need that much sun or is it happy in full shade?
No, it doesn't, because this is very shady. I have these in dark shade. I have them in morning sun. We can actually go over and see in the nursery where I had a big limb of an oak tree fall. And you can see where the sun came through, where they are getting a little too much sun and they're smaller. So too much sun will make them stunted, especially if it's dry like it has been. So if they were getting irrigated, I think they would have been okay, but we've been having such dry weather. You can see that line where the sun was.
We'll take a look at that here later. This patch, as I look at it, is about 10 or 12 feet across. When you planted this, how many plants did you put in? How long has it taken it to get this big?
I bet it might have been 20 plants. I'm not sure how many years. 7 if I had to guess, because this tree house has been here for 7 years. My son's tree house, and I think it's definitely been here as long as that's been here. So somewhere around that.
Have you had to do anything to contain it? Is it an aggressive spreader?
No, they just clump. They don't spread at all.
I'm going to look at these fronds a little more closely. Show us what we're looking at here. If we were talking about fronds and pinnae and bipinnate and all those.
The spores, you can't even see.
Are there any spores on this one?
You can see some little ones there. There's other ferns we can look at where you'll see a lot more. But what happens is these will fall off and spread around in the wind. And then if they find a happy place and they get enough moisture, they'll germinate. I have volunteer ferns all over my yard that just show up. Not this one in particular, but other ones like Japanese painted fern, they just show up all over the place. The conditions have to be just right. That's the cool thing about ferns with their reproductive spores.
So this one is one of your very favorite landscape ferns?
Favorite because it does act as a shrub. It has so much going for it because it's so diverse. It's evergreen, it's hardy, it's tough. Ferns are labeled as being delicate sometimes, I think, like lady fern, They need moisture. Everyone says, oh, ferns, you got to be careful with the moisture. Not all of them. There's plenty. Christmas fern, autumn fern, Himalayan maidenhair fern, wood fern. There's several that can really take dry, rough conditions where they're just doing their thing.
So you said this one is like a shrub. Is that because it's evergreen? Is it because of the overall height?
Yeah, both of those things. There's certain perennials I feel like you can use as shrub, and this is one of them, especially since it sticks around. It holds its own, which is rare for a perennial. Typically, perennials are here and then they're gone. And the winter, you think, oh, it's just gone and you have nothing. But this does stick around for quite a while. This is my other favorite fern. This is the Himalayan maidenhair fern, Adiatum venestum. It is the Himalayan version of our maidenhair fern. It's short, evergreen, it has a black stem. So it's actually very different than the native ones. It's a very great landscape plant because it's a great ground cover. It stays evergreen through most of the winter, which for a ground cover fern is very unusual. You can see over here a big patch of it that I planted. This has probably been here, I don't know how many years it's been here, probably 10 at least. And it has 2 different shades of green, which I think is really beautiful with the black stem. If you just want to plant a giant ground cover, if you have a big property like I do, it's very helpful. You can see how it's covering the ground. This one does spread. Over here, I planted a new patch of them last summer, and you can see the difference. This one is really thick, and those, you can see where we planted them. But in a few years, over there will look just like this.
Well, spread is sometimes a scary word. Is it too aggressive? Do you have to come out here and
No.
pull it out?
You can see it does go back in there a little bit, but it's not terrible, and it's so beautiful.
And this is one that I think many of us are not familiar with.
Yes,
I
it is
have
not. Honestly, it looks like a houseplant fern. You can actually put this in a container on your porch and you'll have an evergreen fern all winter, depending on the winter. If it's really cold or if you don't water it, because you do have to water it in the winter. I keep this in containers all winter. Beautiful. It's great.
How would it do in an outdoor container as opposed to in the ground?
Yeah, it does great. I have it on my porch.
And here we're almost in full shade also, so it's very tolerant. Does it tolerate sun?
A little bit. I think most ferns can tolerate some sun. I would say not the afternoon hot sun of the summer.
Mhm.
Ferns will get burnt in that, especially if it dries out. Like we get our dry, hot summer. If you're looking for some sun for a fern, I'd give it morning sun if you can. Unless it's a wet spot, then you're good to go.
And this is dry shade again also.
Yes, this is dry shade. These trees are pretty old.
We're on a large slope here, so we probably get a lot of
Yeah.
drainage rather than water
Yep.
building up. So that idea that ferns like to be in moist, cool spots is just not necessarily true at all.
No, not for all of them. There are certain ones, though. Being in the nursery business, I get to know that really quickly because of my plants are in containers. So I know what ferns like moisture. There's Athrium, which is the lady fern, and Japanese painted ferns. They love it. Royal fern, which is a relative of cinnamon fern. Those are the 2 off the top of my head that I know love water.
What else do you have planted with this? This is just an interesting spot.
There's a giant jewelweed there. No, that's a volunteer, which the hummingbirds love. So I do tend to leave them a little bit. That is Japanese beach fern right back there, which is really pretty, the Lipteris. And this upright, it stays green longer than other deciduous ferns for some reason. It is not evergreen, but it stays evergreen maybe a couple months past other ones, which is interesting. So it's cool it does that. And it's a nice, tall, upright, good textural fern.
I see you have an Elysium parviflorum in there too,
Yes,
which is
that's-
interesting brightening of that spot.
Yeah, I like chartreuse a lot.
This is interesting in that you have it planted here along the edge, or it's spread along the edge of this weeping Japanese maple,
Mhm.
but it doesn't go underneath.
Maybe a little. It doesn't it? A little bit with some sweet woodruff and some poison ivy and some ginger. Look at that ginger, and I didn't even know that was under there.
But not enough to be a problem. Not that you're going to have to be in there and pulling it out.
No,
They seem to be very well behaved.
Yeah, it's not super fast. Here's some Japanese painted ferns. These actually got transplanted here when we had a tree that got taken down, and they got taken out with a tree, and I had to put them somewhere, and they ended up back here.
How long do you think they've been there?
Oh gosh, 15 years maybe.
And they have not spread much at all.
No, those do not. Those do spread by spores, though. Like I was saying,
Mhm.
I can show you some volunteers around my property where they just showed up. I actually have one down by my potting bench that's in a really weird crack that's just growing in a very strange place.
Now, these, I believe I heard, like more moisture,
They do.
but they're growing here happily with the Himalayan maidenhair fern.
Yeah. I think that when it's more dry, they probably don't look as perky as they do right now since we've just had all this moisture. There's usually a wood hyacinth that comes in with these. That comes up first, and then these ferns come up after that. You can see where they were blooming.
Mhm. So what's this behind it now?
That is our native maidenhair fern, Adiatum pedatum, five-fingered maidenhair fern. And that is a very large, very mature clump. That's probably been there as long as I've been here, so that's about 20 years old.
The fronds look very different than the
Yes,
Himalayan
it
maidenhair
is
fern.
it has the black stem, but yeah, it's very different.
I'm guessing it's called five-fingered because the fronds are actually arranged in a palmate configuration there, and it looks like a hand
Yep.
reaching out. My goodness. Now, you said this is a native, and it also seems to be quite happy and well-behaved here and
Yep.
not trying to take over.
Yeah, that one doesn't spread at all that I've ever noticed. It just clumps.
And it's about 2.5, maybe 3 feet tall at most. So this is an interesting arrangement of different ferns all occupying basically the same niche,
Mm-hmm.
but not competing with each other, just being well behaved.
I have really good soil, so that's helpful too. This property is really old, so I have a lot of leaf litter and rich soil, which is helpful.
That raises an interesting question. Do we have to fertilize ferns,
No, they do not like fertilizer at all.
even if they're in our typical red clay?
I would add some really good compost and some good soil. If you have hard, yucky soil, I would make the soil nice, but I wouldn't put any fertilizer in there. When I'm fertilizing my ferns, when I pot them up, I only give them half a teaspoon of fertilizer. Typically, my plants get 2 teaspoons. So it's a quarter of the portion of my normal fertilizer.
Is that normal fertilizer or just a balanced?
It's a balance, just like Osmocote. Yeah, but a very small amount.
Okay.
So definitely, they grow very slow and they don't like to be fertilized. That's why they're expensive, because they take a long time to grow.
Okay. What else do we have here in the way of ferns?
Let's see. We have these Christmas ferns down here. This is our native Christmas fern. They don't look super impressive right now, but I have not done any work back in this garden this year. Last summer, it got replanted. They probably just need to be looked after. Plants like to get a little love every once in a while. I think they probably just need that because these are old. They've been around a while. But I've got some wood poppy in here that might be competing with them and some weeds. I probably need to pull out these woods, see how they're growing in. I need to pull those out because that gets huge. It's a really big native plant.
Okay. It looks like I'm seeing some spores on the backside of these
Yes, you
fronds.
do have a lot of spores here. That is loaded, isn't it? Yeah, they have a ton of spores. It's interesting how certain ones have a lot. See how thick those are and those aren't.
Have you found these self-sowing themselves off?
No, I have never seen them do that. It's very interesting.
Hmm.
I guess they're very selective, just like any plant. Certain plants are very easy to propagate and certain ones aren't, right?
And I see over here we have some of the Himalayan maidenhair, and right next to it, some of the native maidenhair. You can really see the difference
Yes, and
they're
beside each other.
in those fronds.
Here's another Japanese painted. I have a lot of that combo everywhere.
I see you have a lot of these hardy begonias in here too.
Yes, they're very prolific. I love it though. It's a pretty plant.
Let's pause right here to see what questions our listeners have.
Well, Britt, we've had a couple of questions come up here, and the Himalayan maidenhair fern seems to be a big hit today. One person asked if that Himalayan hair fern is available locally. Where could we go to find one?
Yes, I have several hundred available. If anyone wants some, I'd love to sell some. They're really nice. I potted them up in the spring, so they're really big and rooted.
Have you supplied any to local nurseries where we might be able to find them?
I don't think I have this year. Typically, Reams Creek will buy some, but I don't think they bought any this year. But I'm only 10 minutes north of Reams Creek, so if you wanted to contact me through my website and come and get some, that'd be fine.
Okay, we'll have to find a way to do that. We'll have to tell Reams Creek and other nurseries that we want to see this one. Can you tell us once again the scientific name of that maidenhair fern?
It's Adiatum venestum with a V, as in victory.
Adiatum venestum. Excellent. Thank you. Your ferns, you said that some of these are green all year long. Some of them are deciduous. I know with my ferns, when they're deciduous, they throw brown fronds in the winter. Yours look extremely clean. What do you have to do to clean up a fern bed when winter comes and fronds start to turn brown?
There's a couple different things you can do. Since I've gotten so busy as a gardener and grower through the years, I've decided not to do anything anymore because I don't have a lot of time. If you're like me and you're really busy, you can just let the green frond come right through the brown ones. They will. There'll be a period where it's ugly for a little while. If you don't cut those brown ones down for winter, if you want it to look pristine all the time, I would recommend cutting them back probably late February, early March. Sometimes we'll get some warmer weather, and then for the new frost will start coming through, the brown ones, and they don't want to get in there and try and sort them out. But yeah, whatever green ones, I would let them go all winter and just cut them real late, or you can just leave them go, just let them all mingle, and by April it'll all just look green again, and you won't even see that brown.
Okay. So to a certain extent, they're self-cleaning. They still make a nice display without having to put a lot of extra work in there cleaning things up in the winter. That's good to know.
Yeah. Yeah, they do. As long as you're willing to put up with that little bit of tidiness.
Well, a lot of us are gardeners and we recognize that gardens do that. So that's okay. Another question was about growing some of these ferns in pots. You mentioned that some of these do okay in containers. Of the ones we just talked about, the autumn fern, the Himalayan fern, the five-fingered maidenhair fern, Christmas ferns, if you were going to grow them in containers, which one do you think would do well in containers?
I put the Himalayan maidenhair fern every year on my porch because it's so perfect. It looks great all year. It really does. Even through the winter, it just stays so nice. I would say any of the evergreen fern would do great in a pot. The reason why I like the Himalayan maidenhair fern is because it gets so thick and just fills out the whole pot. It's short and tidy, and it's just so delicate look. It makes you look good. It's like a houseplant fern, but it's still living on my porch. It's pretty cool.
Well, that's a good thing to know because I know a lot of us have pots and something that's evergreen in a pot would be great. So I think I'm going to try that out. Well, let's go on here to the next piece of video and then we'll come back and pick up some more questions. And now we're back with ferns. So what else in this area do you want to talk to us about?
Okay, cinnamon fern is a very tall native fern, Osmunda cinnamonea. If it has some moisture, it can take a little more sun. It gets a big brown stalk on it. I think that's probably why it's called cinnamon fern, because it's the color of cinnamon.
How big is big?
3 feet, I'd say. And it's an upright fern as well.
I have some cinnamon fern growing in some fairly bad soil in dry shade under an oak tree, and it's not very happy. What should I do about that?
I would probably move it out of the dry. So that's a fern that doesn't really like to be dry.
Okay.
hmm
I see a fronds of a different fern yet behind it there.
In the back, that's royal fern, which is a cousin of the cinnamon fern, Osmunda regalis. Royal fern has a very different frond than other ferns. The fronds are individual and more rounded. It just looks really different.
All told, I'm seeing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different ferns growing down here just in this place. All in harmony, all getting along, all being well behaved. I think that's pretty inspiring that you can do so much with them.
Oh, in the shade garden, I think it's essential because you get a lot of different textures and different shades of green. Everyone says, oh, I want flowers in the shade. You really need texture in the shade because flowers don't last too long. There isn't anything that blooms a really long time that lives in the shade compared to sun gardens. So you really have to go with texture and form.
What about color on the ferns? What kind of fall color can we expect on these?
That's a good question. I haven't really noticed. I don't think they have really good fall color that I can remember. A lot of these stay evergreen, the big bunches.
Let's take a look at just how shady this spot is, just panning across from side to side. You can see the area we were standing in there. The trees here are second growth trees, but they're very bushy. There's room for the tree house in there. And it is not dense shade. You can see sky through the trees, but it's very much a filtered shade with some patches of sun. Today's cloudy, so it's not as striking as it would be, but it's a beautiful semi-shady spot and one that can be a challenge to landscape. Rick, we have a question or two on transplanting. How easy is it to transplant? Rich Snyder is asking how he would go about moving some hay-scented ferns or Christmas ferns. He has them somewhere in his landscape and he wants to put them somewhere else. Any thoughts on that for us?
Just like other perennials, I would do it in the spring or fall, and I would base it around rainfall. If it's really dry, I wouldn't touch it. But if we have lots of moisture and the weather is cooler, then we're in a transitional season, I would just treat it like any other plant in the garden. I would just wait until things aren't really busting through. They're either coming out of dormancy or going into dormancy when they're smaller. That's what I would do.
So that would be true whether you're transplanting them from a pot into your landscape or digging them up and moving them in your landscape. Either way, wait till it's cool and hopefully a winter.
I think planting a fresh fern is a lot easier on the plant than moving ones. We just had all this rain this summer, so I would say you could put ferns in now as long as you're watering them. But if you're moving a plant and disrupting the roots, it's a lot different. It's a lot more vulnerable. Putting a brand new fern, I would do when we're having a drought or it's the middle of summer. Transplanting is a lot harder for sure.
Okay, but it is doable. And again, your recommendation is not to fertilize right after you move it, then let it get established.
I wouldn't fertilize it at all. I wouldn't ever fertilize your ferns. Just give them compost, give them some really good soil, but I wouldn't ever put fertilizer on them. Because like I said, I only do a half a teaspoon in a pot. I wouldn't even bother in the ground because they're going to get all their good stuff in the ground. So I wouldn't do anything.
It sounds like an easy plant to work with. One last question came up here. That's about rabbits. I know you're going to tell us about slugs here in a little while, but let's jump the gun. Any problems that you've had out there with rabbits nibbling ferns?
No, I've never had my ferns eaten. I've had other plants like grasses and things in the wintertime. And dianthus, the little edges will be nibbled. But no, I've never had them eat my ferns. I have a big dog though, and she chases everything away.
Going back to the containers question, let's answer one more question here real quick. Someone asked if ferns in containers last through the winter.
They do. I would say until we get a really, really cold snap. Sometimes we get that crazy weather where it'll dip down, especially if you hadn't watered it, it'll dry out and freeze. But yeah, if we have a mild winter, it'll last. By the end of winter, usually it's kind of yucky, but that goes with any perennial.
Have you ever tried to take any of the more interesting foliage ones like that Himalayan maidenhair fern and move it indoors so you have it as an indoor house plant? Ever tried to do that?
I have been wanting to do that, and I'm actually going to do that this year because I have a couple in some nice pots. I was at Time in the Garden, the houseplant store on Merriman. They have certain plants. I think autumn fern might be one of them. There's certain ferns that you can have as houseplants. I didn't realize that. That's something I'm learning about.
I think that's an interesting idea. Time in the Garden people have talked to us on our Gardening in the Mountains program before about transitioning pots from one season to the other. They may be a good resource of people to talk to about how to transition ferns throughout the year. Good suggestion.
They have quite a big fern selection of houseplants in there, and some of them are hardy ferns. So yeah, you can switch them back and forth every months.
Let's see what else we have here in exploring your nursery. It's been an interesting journey so far.
We are back here now in the nursery area. It's very dark under these trees on this side. As we move down the hill, it gets a little bit brighter. There are hundreds of ferns here growing in gallons, and you're going to hear some stories about how these came to be in gallons, how they grow, how they behave. You're going to learn a great deal about the fern nursery business in addition to learning about ferns. So let's tell us about some of the interesting things you have here.
I am lucky enough to have this wooded area in my property where I can just put the ferns up here where they're supposed to be going. Sometimes the sun comes in, just depending on the angle of it and the time of year. I feel like it's really helpful to have that for the ferns because that's what they're used to. I think that's partly why they do so good up here. I'm not sure how many varieties of ferns I have. Probably a dozen or more, native and non-native.
As we go through them, let's talk a little bit about that native and non-native thing and why one would want one over the other.
So this is male fern, which is a wood fern. There's all types of wood ferns. Yeah, there's male fern and there's robust male fern. Male fern gets about 2 feet tall, I believe, 2 to 3. It's an upright evergreen fern, and it's native, and it can take dry to moist soil. It's a great native fern.
When you say it's a native fern, is it native here in our hills and mountains?
I think so. I'm not positive, but I'm pretty sure it is.
Do you find that the native ferns behave any better than the non-native ferns?
Not really. I think I'm saying that because the autumn fern and the Himalayan man fern are 2 of my favorites, and they're not native. If you compare them to Christmas fern and let's say lady fern or hay-scented fern, they all really perform very similar. Hay-scented is a really lovely ground cover fern for full sun, by the way. It's a native deciduous full sun fern, which is unusual. I don't have any right now, but it's a great fern. This is ghost fern, which is Athrium. It's similar to a Japanese painted fern, but it's called ghost fern because it's more silver and it's more upright than a Japanese painted fern. They're not very impressive in a 1-gallon pot for some reason. They just never are. These have had a little bit of slug damage, so they're not as big as usual, but in the garden they get 2 to 3 foot tall and upright and very bright. It's a very vibrant, really silvery fern. That's why they call it ghost fern.
So where would I use this as opposed to the Japanese painted fern?
I would say where you want something a little bit taller and maybe a little more bright. The Japanese painted has the purpley color. This has more of a silvery white. You can see it in the new growth.
How old are these in the pots now, do you think?
These we potted up probably in March. So this is a slow one in the pot because you can see like these got potted up at the same time and look how full these are. Or no, that says May actually. I'm sorry. We pot up ferns in May, not March. I used to pot them up in March and then they would get hit by the frost. So now I do May.
Ghost fern, that's another one I'm just not at all familiar with.
It's a really beautiful fern. That's just not a very good example of it in a pot. This is Japanese beach fern, which I had in the garden down there, that real tall one. This is what it looks like in a pot. This will get about 2 to 3 feet tall and it stays green. This is one that stays green through, I'd say December. It'll stay green through part of the winter. It's a good one for upright, partially evergreen. This is ostrich fern.
Now, does ostrich fern get huge?
It gets really big and it really spreads if it's happy. I've never grown this in the ground. I've only ever grown it in a pot, but I've seen them and they spread like crazy. This one can take sun if it has moisture, from what I've heard. So it's one that if you have like a wet spot that's sunnier, it'll go crazy. It just gets huge.
Okay, there's something going on here. We have ostrich fern here, which looks vigorous. It's about a foot high in the pot. And over here we have ostrich fern, which is a lot smaller in the pot.
This is from slugs. You can see right here and see that that is slug damage. I got busy and I didn't get up here to treat it soon enough. I'm not sure why they like this side more. It's interesting. We did just put Sluggo out 2 days ago. You can see these little pellets, which is organic slug bait. It really does work. We did the ghost fern, the ostrich fern, and the lady ferns. Those are the 3 that the slugs really love.
What else besides slugs is going to chomp on ferns? Are deer going to be a problem? Do you have deer in here?
Not in here. No, my dog chases a deer away. I see deer, but they've never eaten my ferns. I'm not sure if they eat ferns. Seems like they would.
And has this been just a banner year for slugs?
Now that the rain came, I haven't had a lot of slug damage yet, but now they're just starting. This is called tassel fern. It is a relative of Christmas fern. It's like an Asian Christmas fern. It's like a fuzzier version of Christmas fern. Let's see if I can find one that's a good example. They really look extra fuzzy in the spring. Here's a little fiddlehead. Yeah, there's a little fiddlehead coming. These look fuzzier in the spring when they come up. You can see what I mean. They almost look furry, fuzzy. Here, you can see that. I don't know if you can see it, but they have almost chartreuse new growth in the spring that's very fuzzy. It's really interesting when it comes up. It's just an interesting cousin to the Christmas fern. It's a little different.
Does it grow about the same size?
Yes, about the same size, same conditions. I like it. I think it's very pretty. It's a little more, has more texture than the Christmas fern. There's a little begonia that's coming up in there.
I see that. Do those seed themselves in here?
Yes, that's what they do.
Good for them.
Yes. This is lady fern. Lady and red fern, which has a red stem. You can see the red stem. This is a cultivar. I should have spaced these a little sooner than I did. They were smushed together just a few days ago, and they did have some slug damage, so we put the Sluggo out. In a few more weeks, these will all fill back in again, and they'll be beautiful. We got there just in time, and they'll still look good.
You said this is a cultivar, so our native lady fern doesn't have that red stem.
Yeah, people just like this lady in red, and the name is fun.
When it's growing out in the garden, is that red stem really quite noticeable?
It is. It's very pretty.
What's that behind it there? It's quite a bit taller.
That is cinnamon fern. I sell so many of the cinnamon ferns. I probably pot up 500 cinnamon ferns every spring. That is one of the ferns I pot up that it does much better from bare root. A lot of these, like lady fern, a lot of the other ferns we looked at come in little plugs from Casa Flora, which is a really great fern grower that I get all my plugs from. But there are many ferns that I've noticed over the years that did not do well from plugs. So I switched over to bare root. Bare root doesn't necessarily grow faster, but some of them just do much better from bare root. Cinnamon fern is one of them. Wood fern, Dryoptis marginalis is another one. Christmas fern, and hay-scented.
When they're bare root, they're taken when they're dormant, and the crown, whatever you call the growing point, is just divided up into little segments.
Yep, they come in a big box, and you just pot them all up and hope for the best. Sometimes they don't come up, but most of the time they do. These were potted up in May, and you can see how huge this is from a bare root, just from a few months. There are some roots that are growing down at the bottom now, but it's taken that long Even from a giant bare root plant like this, it took that many months to grow this into this pot.
So they are slow to fill.
So slow. Even if they look beautiful on top, they might still not be rooted in this pot.
There'd be no problem planting out one like that.
No. Especially we're almost into August, and now that it's been raining, it's not really a problem.
So bare root ferns, I've never heard of it except for ferns. Other trees, other plants, are bare root ferns commercially available for homeowners, or are they strictly a fern
I
trade
think they
item?
probably are. I wouldn't know because I've never tried to buy them as just a gardener. You'd probably have to buy a certain amount of them. You know what I mean? You probably can't get like 5. You'd have to buy like 50. I'm not sure if you'd be able to do that on your own.
Let's pause it for a minute and see if we have any more questions about ferns growing up here in the nursery, about bare root ferns, about the difference in these fern cultivars. There's much more to the world of ferns than we all thought.
One question was about ferns that would be your top choice to spread to cover an area quickly without a great deal of intervention on our part. Who's a good spreader?
The best spreading fern off the top of my head is hay-scented fern. It spreads like crazy, and it can grow in full sun. Ostrich fern as well. Those two, just off the top of my head, are the most quickly spreading.
Are there any ferns that have a particularly interesting odor?
The hay-scented do, when you crush them, they do smell. They have kind of a fern smell. That's the only one I can think of. That's probably why they call it that, obviously.
But you wouldn't have any that would be like scented geraniums where you'd brush your hands and find any scent from the foliage.
No, I don't think so.
Which ferns that you've talked about would you put in the evergreen category?
We've got autumn fern, Himalayan maidenhair fern, Christmas fern, all of the wood ferns. The autumn fern is a type of wood fern. Any of the Dryopteris ferns, they're all evergreen. The Japanese beech fir has a little bit of the beginning of winter evergreen. It does dwindle away, but it stays greener more than other deciduous ferns. Yeah, I think that's all of them.
Fern reference page will be some help in identifying who's evergreen and who's not. So we have to just try to remember what Britt is telling us, although she is an encyclopedia of ferns today. Britt, what would be a good fern you would recommend for somebody to grow in a pine grove under pine trees? It's a pretty dry site.
Fern. Let's see, dry. I would say Christmas fern is very adapted to dry, especially if you want something native. I would say Christmas fern or a wood fern, autumn fern. Christmas I always recommend because it's native and it can do dry.
One more quick question. Any experience with ferns under black walnuts?
I'm not sure if they're affected by the juglone and walnuts. I've never really experienced that. I did work at a bed and breakfast years ago, and they had these giant wood ferns growing under black walnuts. I just remember that because I have a strange plant memory. So I know wood fern will grow under there. I don't think they're affected by walnuts, but that would be something that I'd have to look up because I don't remember. I don't think they are, though.
Let's go on here to this last segment of video, look some more into your fern nursery there, and then we'll wrap up with any other questions that come in.
Okay, we're back. I just see more things looking down the hill here. I see an array of ferns and hostas and grasses. Clearly, just looking out behind you here, why don't you pause here for just one moment? Just looking out behind you, I see hoop houses, I see shade houses, I see just an array of colored things growing here. You obviously are growing more than just fern. You're supplying these primarily to local nurseries, is that correct?
Local landscapers and gardeners, landscape designers, and some nurseries. Yes, I have other retail nurseries that come and buy plants. I am happy to sell retail plants to serious plant people. If you're interested in getting a bunch of plants, I'm happy to sell them. It's hard for me. Wholesale is very busy and I live here, so sometimes it's difficult if someone is looking for one plant. You know what I'm saying? But if you send me an email and you say, I want these 5 plants, I can always pull them and you can just come grab it. I'm happy if it's organized in a way that it's easy for me.
Okay. You're not really a retail nursery.
No, I do retail by appointment, and I am thinking about having a retail week coming up. We'll see in August because it's been very slow from how dry it's been this year.
Yeah.
I'm considering doing kind of a flash retail sale week. We'll see.
We're walking down through here, down these paths, and just seeing ferns after ferns. When you look at this fern, you know right away what it is. They're family members to you, but what is it about it that you recognize that tells you what it is?
This is Christmas fern, and this is a very funny thing that I can tell you on the identification. I'll plop this down here. So you see how this looks like a boot right here? It looks like a Christmas boot, like a stocking. That's why it's called Christmas fern. This is one that I do know where the common name came from. Isn't that interesting? See how this one doesn't have the spores and that older one did down there? This is just too young to have them. These are this
spring.
current season. These are from May.
This is an interesting plant that I'm looking at here. I'm not even
Yes.
sure that it's a fern.
Yes. A little ways back down in the garden, I was talking about a fern that didn't even look like a fern because the fronds look so different. You can see how they're spaced out more, and it has the stem. I don't even know how to describe it, but I think it looks very different than other ferns. It's called royal fern. It's a cousin of the cinnamon fern, Osmunda regalis. Cinnamon is Osmunda cinnamonea. It almost looks tropical to me. It has a very tropical look and it gets very tall. I think I read it can get like up to 4 feet tall if it's happy. It likes moisture. It can take some sun. I need to get some of these planted somewhere so I can really see what they can do. These love water. This is one I have to water all the time if we don't get water. So it's high maintenance if you don't have a wet spot. Royal fern, Osmunda regalis. I love it. I think it's very different.
It is, and it just doesn't look that fernly.
It doesn't. It's different. A lot of times when I get cinnamon fern bare root, a bunch of royal fern comes with the cinnamon fern. I sort them out. These actually came out of the cinnamon ferns. I'd even order these.
Seems like that would be a little bit of a problem.
It can be, but I do end up selling them. Sometimes I just get credit from my supplier and say, hey, I didn't order royal fern. But now that I've been selling them, I'm like, oh, well.
Right there.
The cinnamon. That's a combo.
That one right there.
Yeah, we have a couple combos. Here's a combo here, too.
Here's a combo here.
Yeah.
What would happen if you planted those together as a combo?
They would just grow together and you'd have both. I actually have a little bit of that down by my greenhouse. I have a cinnamon fern growing with an autumn fern. They all showed up together and that's just what happens.
Tell me what we're looking at here. This looks really different from end to end.
This is autumn fern, one of my favorite ferns. We had probably a third of our pin oak tree fall into the nursery this spring. We had a really horrible hailstorm. Luckily, that's all we lost, but we lost part of our pine and this yellowwood tree. All of it fell. It was May, my busiest time of the year. So I just got all the branches out and went along with my business and just kept going and didn't even realize this was happening. If you come down here, you can see where these pine trees are shading out this section. This little chunk here was not getting enough shade. You can see I don't irrigate up here every day because a lot of this stuff doesn't need irrigation. You can see where it was suffering from too much sun and not enough water. I think if it was getting water, it probably would look better. It's been very stressful.
Here's a bunch over there.
Oh, yeah.
Are those the Himalayan maidenhair?
Yes, that is the Himalayan maidenhair fern.
Let's take a closer look at those. They look very lush. And again, these would be perfectly happy in full shade, in moderate shade. They'd be happy under the roots of a big tree.
Yeah, and this gets a good amount of light right here. They can take some indirect. This gets morning sun that comes in through here.
So it sounds like overall, this is one of your very favorite ferns.
Yeah, I love it. I love the 2 tones of green and the fact that it's so tolerant of so many different situations and evergreen.
Well, even here in this fading light, we can see quite easily the 2 shades of green. The new growth is quite a bit brighter, and it gives it optical texture beyond just the texture of those cute little leaves. How many different maidenhair ferns do we have? I mean, it doesn't look like our native maidenhair fern, but there are other maidenhair ferns that don't have the same growth habit as this exactly. Can you tell me more about maidenhair ferns?
Maidenhair ferns, the 5-finger maidenhair gets about yay tall, the black stem, and very delicate looking.
And that's the one we saw under the big tree back
Yeah.
there. Mm-hmm.
And
There are other maidenhair ferns that don't look quite like this, but still have what I call this maidenhair looking leaf.
you mean like a houseplant fern?
I have some that grow outside in pots and they stay out all winter, but I don't think they're this one.
It's a maidenhair though. This is Marizii maidenhair fern that does really great in the garden. This has been here for many years and I don't grow it anymore because I had them die in the pots over the winter one year, but it probably was just a weird freaky thing. I should probably start growing it again because it does great in the garden. It almost looks like the Himalayan and it's taller, but it's not evergreen. So it's not going to do the same as the Himalayan as far as keeping its foliage and making that nice tidy ground cover, but it is a nice fluffy kind of mid-height. It's not as tall as the 5-finger.
This has been great. I've seen more about ferns in their garden habitat growing here in the pots. I've learned more about ferns than I knew before. I'm excited to go out and try something really different. I know some of us have some more questions here. So let's just see what we have from our listeners today.
Well, Britt, that was an interesting tour through your garden there. Clarify that at the end. The fern that you and I were discussing is indeed that Marizii maidenhair fern. And I do grow it in pots. It's not evergreen, but it comes back every spring. And so it's definitely hardy for me outdoors here in Weaverville in pots. Well, we had a really interesting question here from Tim. He said that he has a place in his large ferns that is sort of pushed down, beat down. He thinks maybe some animal is bedding down there at night, but he has a security camera in the area and he hasn't seen any animals there. Would ferns, when they get fairly large, will the fronds flop? Will they flatten out on their own if they're a big fern?
I think they would from weather. If we had some hard rain, it sounds like something might be laying in there. That would be my first guess. Other than rain, I don't know how else it would end up like that.
So typically they would stand upright, though. They don't usually flop, even the big ostrich.
Another reason would be if there was really dry weather and they just weren't happy. But if we had a drought, I could see they might start to shrivel up like that.
Another good question was about pruning ferns. If you prune off the fronds, does it make them grow back thicker? Is there any reason to prune ferns at all?
I don't think so. If you prune them, you will get more fronds, but it won't make it grow bushier or anything like that. It'll grow back because I've had that happen where some are broken and then new little fronds come up. No, it's not like other perennials. A lot of times if you cut a plant in half, it'll make it thicker, but I don't think a fern is like that.
Okay. So basically plant them and let them go. If they're happy, they will grow happily. Don't fertilize them and let them fill their niche in the landscape. They are not the delicate little ferns that we all read about. They're pretty tough, would you say?
Yeah, they are, especially if you follow the rules of the ones that do need moisture, making sure they get that. So you just have to pay attention and know what you're doing with each variety. I wanted to say I did find my black walnut list, and it says cinnamon and sensitive fern, which are both osmunda ferns, will live under black walnuts.
Okay, excellent. I want to take the opportunity here before we sign off to show another resource that is about where we can go to get more information on ferns. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with this NCSU plant toolbox. If you're not, the way to find it is just to Google NCSU plant toolbox. We'll take you to our Extension Gardener toolbox, which has a tremendous listing. I think we have about 4,700 plants in there now of all types. You can go over into the search bar, and if you do, you can search something that just says ferns. And if you search ferns, you're liable to see a whole listing of all the different kinds of ferns that are on that NCSU site. If you go even farther, you can look at specific ferns. So here's one that we've talked about quite a bit, the autumn fern. There's some cultural information on there. There's some video information on there. There are a lot of photos of it there. And this site, this NCSU plant toolbox, can be a great place to go to get specific cultural information about light, about water, about varieties of these ferns that Britt talked about and other ferns. So give it a try. The NCSU plant toolbox, a great resource. Let's go ahead and wrap up here because this has been great fun. I enjoyed being out there with you with the ferns, and I appreciate everybody here who came to join us today to learn about ferns. I hope you got some questions answered. I hope you have your mind stimulated. You're thinking, as I am, about ferns in different ways in your gardens and your landscapes. Thank you today for learning about ferns.